A lot of talk about tax reform in recent weeks and recent months, really. We've got a tax review underway. Well, now one Liberal MP has put forward one specific idea of a tax break that could be offered to deliver the sort of things Malcolm Turnbull's been talking so much about since he became Prime Minister. Innovation, creativity, the economy of the 21st century. Backbencher David Coleman says give a capital gains tax break, relief, no capital gains tax to people investing in startup companies. To tell us more about it, David Coleman is with us now. Thanks for your time. So what would actually qualify as a startup under your proposal?
Yeah, a startup under this proposal, David, it would be defined as a company that had existed for less than 2 years and had revenue in the last 12 months of less than $1 million. So basically, any business that complied with those rules could have an investment, and the investment would not attract capital gains tax on exit.
And any business is the key there. So it doesn't matter if it's a business selling socks or cafes or office equipment. It doesn't have to be some sort of tech startup necessarily. Yeah,
that's right. I think it's difficult to define something like this in such a way that would only apply to the technology industry. Now, obviously, we want to diversify our economy, as the Prime Minister has said. The industries of tomorrow are not the same as the industries of yesterday, and those technology industries would certainly benefit from a proposal such as this, but it wouldn't be limited to them in its impact.
Well, if that's the case, I mean, would plumbers, builders, etc., if they want to actually, start a private company under their name, would they get any a tax break here as well?
Yeah, if a company is registered as a proprietary limited company, it would be eligible, and it's about creating a culture of entrepreneurialism, David. I asked the PBO to do the Parliamentary Budget Office to do some numbers on the cost of this, because of course the instinctive reaction from some will be, well, what's this going to cost to the budget? And the PBO estimated it would cost about $50 million over the forward estimates period to provide this incentive to invest in startup companies. That's about 1/34,000th of forecast government revenue over the next 4 years. So I think it is a modest and affordable proposal that would make it significantly easier for businesses, new businesses, that were seeking to raise capital.
Now, what about the benefits? I mean, that's the cost, as you mentioned there, $50 million over 4 years, and I think it also shows it would go up a little bit after that. But what would be the benefit? I mean, would there be an employment benefit if more people started investing in startups, in new companies?
Yeah, I believe that there certainly would be, David. And the proposition for a founder of a new startup would be this. When going to an investor, they could say, this is a startup, it might work, it might not. But if it does work, you won't pay any capital gains tax on the profits. And that would create an advantage for those startup entrepreneurs over, say, people promoting investment in, say, investment property or listed shares. And I think what that means is you'll see an influx of capital into the startup sector, which means more startups, which means more opportunities for people in those new industries. And in the long run, should mean more innovative companies and more jobs.
And it's an interesting point that you raised there I want to ask you about. People, a lot of Australians we know, like to invest in property. The negative gearing rules make that pretty attractive. Is what you're talking about trying to entice an average Australian who at the moment might be investing in property to instead put that money into a startup?
Yeah, well, I think, David, a culture in which people invest in a range of asset classes can only be a good thing for the nation. And obviously investment in startups is risky, and so it wouldn't be sensible for the average person to put all their eggs in that basket. But some exposure to the startup sector is probably a good thing for many investors. One of the issues you're probably familiar with is a subject called crowdfunding. Effectively at the moment it's quite hard for other legislative reasons for smaller investors to invest in startups, and that's another issue that the government is working on to make those smaller investments by individuals easier. And I think this proposal would add to the crowdfunding reforms and make startup investing quite attractive.
Now, where is this proposal up to? I read today in the Financial Review that Joe Hockey was on board with the idea, well, before there was a change in the leadership and a change in Treasurer. Was that the case?
Look, I've had some really good discussions with Joe Hockey and indeed in the last couple of weeks with Scott Morrison as well, and the response to this proposal has been quite encouraging. Having said that, obviously the government's working through a range of proposals at the moment, both in the tax area and also in the broader innovation space. I would certainly like to see this concept included in those packages, but that's obviously something that's still being worked through.
I mean, there's a lot of pressure for an overall cut in company tax. That would obviously cost a whole lot more than what you're talking about here. What sort of priority would you like to see given to your suggestion on startups? Yeah,
well, look, I think, David, as I said before, this is a modest cost to the budget. I think there's not much doubt it would have a material impact on the capacity of early stage companies to raise money. I think we know that it's a national priority to get more of an entrepreneurial culture. Look, places like Silicon Valley and Israel, and we talk about their great successes, and we do as a nation want to, you know, encourage the next Seek or the next Atlassian or whoever it may be. So I think from my perspective this is quite important. Obviously there's a much broader array of measures to be considered, but from my perspective this is a modest and affordable measure which would help the economy.
And let me ask you politically, we've seen the new Prime Minister doing the listening, the consulting. We saw that last week with the various business and union and welfare groups that were brought together here in Canberra. When do we need to start seeing some decisions, some announcements, some action on all of this?
Oh, well, look, obviously the Prime Minister's been in place for I think it's 3 weeks now, and one of the things that he has very strongly emphasised is the need to think about the future. You know, the industries of the 20th century are not going to be the growth industries of the 21st century, and frankly the Prime Minister has a great deal of credibility to work with the broader Australian community on these important issues. He understands what it takes to build digital businesses. He's got a very strong understanding of how the economy is evolving, not just here in Australia but around the world, and in due course I'm sure we'll see some very powerful proposals to help take our economy to the next level.
Liberal MP David Coleman, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. An interesting idea.
Thanks, David.